The wind claws at the stone walls. A castle looms in silence, its chambers colder than the night outside. No central heating, no chimneys, just frost crawling into every crack. Now imagine you're inside, about to sleep. Would you survive until morning? Beds were the front line in this battle. Forget the idea of flimsy straw piles. For the wealthy, a bed was a fortress. Heavy wooden frames stretched with rope, mattresses stuffed with straw, wool, or if you were truly rich, goose-down feathers. Each layer mattered, every fiber trapping warmth, every rope creating spring and lift. Slide under the blankets, and you weren't just in bed. You were in a survival chamber. But it wasn't only what you slept on, it was what surrounded you. Four-poster beds weren't just status symbols. They were engineering marvels. Thick curtains wrapped around the frame like a second set of walls. Once drawn shut, they held in body heat and blocked out the endless drafts that seeped from stone. Step inside, and the air itself changed. You could almost forget the ice pressing against the outer walls. For ordinary families, the solutions were humbler, but no less inventive. Straw sacks doubled as mattresses, layered thick to insulate against the freezing ground. Floors were covered with reeds and rushes, often sprinkled with herbs for scent and pest control. These makeshift beds could be rolled, moved, or replaced, practical, flexible, and surprisingly effective. Here's the question for you. If you had to choose, would you rely on heavy curtains to seal in your body heat, or 7 layers of wool blankets stacked high? Comment curtains or blankets, because for medieval families, both were tested strategies. And here's a hidden truth. Beds weren't just for sleep. They were social centers. Entire families crowded into one, not only for warmth, but for connection. Parents, children, sometimes even servants, all under the same canopy. Privacy didn't matter, survival did. Huddled together, stories whispered, candles flickered, and the bed became the heart of the home. Think about the contrast. Today, we waste energy heating whole rooms, often to empty corners. Medieval people concentrated warmth where it mattered, around the human body. Beds weren't furniture. They were weapons against the cold. But even the best designed bed couldn't stay warm on its own. As soon as night dragged on, the sheets turned icy again. That's when the real ingenuity began, warming the bed itself before anyone climbed in. Because in the next part of this story, fire doesn't roar in fireplaces. It hides inside metal pans, glowing bricks, and even ceramic jugs slip beneath the sheets. And those tricks may surprise you. The bed waits, curtains drawn, blankets layered, but without warmth inside, it's just a cold trap. That's why medieval families turned bedtime into a ritual, not just of sleep, but of fire. Picture this. A servant enters with a long-handled pan, metal creaking, embers glowing red inside. He slides it between the sheets, back and forth, leaving trails of heat as sparks hiss. The bed comes alive, transformed from icy cloth to a cocoon of warmth. This was the bed warmer, an invention equal parts ingenious and dangerous. Now pause. Would you trust red-hot coals sliding under your mattress, or would you rather sleep with a heated brick wrapped in cloth at your feet? Comment coals or brick. Both were real options, and each carried its own risks. For nobles, ember pans were a nightly luxury. The comfort was instant, but the danger was real. A single loose coal could burn straight through linen, setting a bed and maybe a chamber on fire. Yet the risk didn't stop them. Comfort was worth the gamble. For common families, safety mattered more. They used hearth-heated bricks, stones, or even baked tiles. Wrapped in rags and slipped into the bed, these radiated steady warmth for hours. No sparks, no flames, just a glowing memory of fire. For children curled against them, those stones meant the difference between sleep and shivering. And then came the hot water bottles of their time. Not rubber, but ceramic jars and leather flasks filled with boiling water. Tucked under blankets, they gave off a gentle heat through the night. It was simple, it was safe, and it worked so well that the method is still with us today. But medieval ingenuity didn't stop there. Pots filled with hot sand. Flat irons straight from the fire, cooled just enough to handle. Even oven-warm tiles carried from the kitchen to the bedroom. If it could store heat, it was pressed into service. Nothing was wasted. Animals too joined the strategy. Dogs at the foot of the bed, cats tucked under blankets, sometimes even goats or calves in side rooms. Strange to modern ears, but each animal was a living heater, radiating precious warmth through the night. Think about the contrast with us. We pour energy into heating entire rooms, space that sits empty while we sleep. Medieval people focused every resource on a single target, the body in the bed. Efficient, practical, brutally smart. So let me ask, if you were forced to choose tonight, would you prefer the risk of burning coals for instant comfort, or trust the steady warmth of a loyal dog curled at your feet? Drop your answer in the comments. But here's the catch. Beds and bricks only worked if you were already dressed to fight the cold. And in the Middle Ages, clothing wasn't about style, it was about survival. Because the next part of this story is about nightshirts, wool gowns, and the strange little hats that made the difference between sleep and frostbite. The fire fades, the bricks cool, the sheets begin to stiffen with frost again. But survival didn't end when the flames died. Medieval people carried their defenses onto their bodies. Nightwear wasn't fashion, it was armor. Picture yourself in a stone chamber. The walls leak drafts. The floor is cold as ice, and the windows are no more than slits. Would you climb under blankets wearing only a thin linen shirt, or wrap yourself in layers of wool, stockings, and even shoes? For most people in the Middle Ages, the answer was obvious. You dressed for bed as if you were preparing for battle. The foundation was the nightshirt, long, loose, reaching down to the ankles, often made of wool or thick linen. Every fiber trapped warm air against the skin, slowing heat loss. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't decorative, it was survival. Then came the nightcap. Today it looks comical, like something out of a cartoon. But in a drafty castle, it was serious business. Most body heat escapes through the head, and a wool or linen cap sealed that warmth in. Without it, you could feel the cold gnawing at your scalp through the night. Stockings, too, stayed on in bed. Sometimes even shoes. It sounds absurd who sleeps in their boots. But consider the floors of the time. Stone, dirt, or wooden planks, all radiating chill upward. Keeping your feet covered wasn't a choice. It was the only way to avoid numb toes by dawn. The wealthy layered their defenses like armor. A linen under tunic, a wool gown, even cloaks lined with fur. Tailors stitched garments tight at wrists and ankles, creating pockets of trapped air, the medieval version of thermal design. Velvet, heavy and dense, served as insulation, while fur cloaks became portable blankets. Wealth looked extravagant, but it was also deeply practical. Ordinary families did the same with whatever they had. Old tunics doubled as nightwear. Day clothes became sleep clothes. No piece of fabric went unused. Children often slept in the same garments they wore to work, sometimes never removing them for days. Warmth mattered more than cleanliness or comfort. Now think about us. We strip down into thin cotton pajamas and trust our thermostats to do the work. Medieval people flipped the logic. Why waste resources heating empty space when you can heat the body directly? In many ways, it was smarter. So here's your question. If you had to spend one winter in a castle, would you trust a mountain of blankets, or would you rather sleep fully clothed, shoes and all? Drop your choice in the comments because for them, it was the difference between survival and sickness. But clothes and beds could only do so much. The cold didn't stop at the threshold. It seeped through stone, doors, and windows, which meant the castle itself, the very architecture had to join the fight. And that's where we go next. Walls as thick as two men, windows shaped like funnels, roofs that worked like nature's insulation. Castles weren't just fortresses against enemies. They were fortresses against winter. The walls rise around you, heavy, unyielding, and cold. At first glance, a castle seems like the worst place to survive. Winter stone everywhere, open spaces, drafts in every corner. But what looks like a frozen prison was, in truth, a carefully engineered machine for warmth. Start with the walls themselves. Some were 12 feet thick, built from dense stone. To us, they looked like blunt weapons against invading armies. But they were also thermal batteries. Stone absorbs heat slowly, then releases it just as slowly. During the day, firelight and even faint sunlight warmed the walls. By night, the stones breathed that warmth back into the chambers. Not enough to make them cozy, but enough to make them survivable. Then look at the windows. Tiny, narrow, arrow-slit shapes, not designed for views, but for survival. Wide on the inside, narrow on the outside. They funneled in daylight while minimizing the escape of heat. Before glass became common, they were sealed with oiled cloth, parchment, or even slices of horn materials that blurred the view but kept out icy drafts. Later, mica panes added strength, but the principle remained. Less window, less cold. And above you, the roof did its part. Thatched roofs weren't crude. They were brilliant. Bundles of reed or straw packed so tightly you couldn't force a finger through, trapped air like nature's insulation. In winter, they locked heat inside. In summer, they bounced hot air away. When rain or snow fell, water slid off instantly, leaving the roof dry. A well-kept thatch could last half a century, sometimes longer than modern shingles. Floors, too, had their defenses. They were layered with straw, reeds, and rush mats. These weren't just for comfort, they insulated against the cold seeping up from the ground. Herbs mixed into the rushes added a pleasant scent and repelled pests, making the floor both functional and fragrant. Doors were heavy, sometimes reinforced with iron, not just for security, but to block the wind. Any gaps were stuffed with cloth or moss to seal them tight. In the harshest months, even internal doorways were hung with thick curtains to hold heat in one room at a time. Now imagine living in that world. Would you prefer a house with massive stone walls that slowly radiated warmth, or a wooden hut with thin walls but a quick fire? Comment stone or wood because both had their strengths, and survival often depended on geography. When you step back, you realize medieval architecture wasn't only about defense against enemies. It was defense against nature itself. The way rooms were arranged, the thickness of walls, even the shape of courtyards, all of it worked together to fight the cold. But even with smart design, the cold still pushed in. And that's when medieval people turned to their final weapon, each other. Because in the next part of the story, warmth came not from stone or wood or fire, but from human bodies packed together under the same roof. The fire smolders low. The walls hold their breath, and in the silence of the castle, the simplest, most powerful source of warmth comes alive. People. Imagine this. You're a servant in a drafty hall, your straw mattress spread across the floor. The choice is simple: sleep alone and shiver, or huddle close with others and survive. Which would you choose? Comment alone or together, because in the Middle Ages, the answer was almost always together. Sleeping together wasn't scandalous, it was survival. Families piled into the same bed. Parents, children, sometimes even grandparents, all pressed shoulder to shoulder. Their combined body heat turned a freezing chamber into a cocoon. What we see as a lack of privacy, they saw as common sense. Nobles did it too. 4 poster beds the size of small rooms were designed to hold more than one sleeper. Curtains sealed the heat inside, while multiple bodies multiplied the warmth. Even kings shared chambers with attendants, not for luxury, but for life. Animals joined the ritual. Dogs curled at the foot of beds, warming toes. Cats slipped under the blankets, purring heaters that never ran out of fuel. In the harshest winters, goats or calves were brought indoors, their body heat lifting the temperature of the room by several degrees. Strange? Maybe. But when survival was at stake, every warm body counted. There was another reason people slept together: safety. A crowded bed meant you weren't alone if danger struck. Thieves, fire, sudden illness, others were close enough to notice, close enough to act. Warmth and protection went hand in hand. And then came the comfort of trust. Imagine the quiet of a medieval night. No hum of machines, no glow of lamps. Just the crackle of a dying fire and the sound of breathing around you. Families whispered stories, exchanged news, or drifted to sleep together in silence. Warmth wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Togetherness was survival. Think about the contrast with today. We value space, privacy, bedrooms for each person. But back then, separate rooms would have meant wasted heat. Concentrating everyone in one space was smarter, leaner, and far more efficient. So let me ask, if you were trapped in a freezing stone castle tonight, would you give up privacy to share warmth? Or risk the cold alone? Comment below, because for medieval families, the choice wasn't luxury. It was life, but even this wasn't enough. Human warmth could carry you through the night, but the cold never gave up. It pressed in through walls and windows, testing every crack. And so the people of the Middle Ages built a final line of defense, not in the bedroom, but in the beating heart of the castle, the Great Hall. Because there, under towering rafters, fires blazed so fiercely, they became both survival and spectacle. The castle sleeps, but the Great Hall still glows. Beneath timber beams and banners, a fire roars so fiercely it seems alive. Sparks leap into the shadows, smoke curls toward the high ceiling, and the heat rolls outward like waves from a living beast. This was the true heart of the castle, the engine of warmth. Step closer and you feel it instantly. Your skin prickles, your face flushes, your hands thaw. Step back only a few paces and the cold swallows you whole. That was the paradox of these enormous hearths. Immense heat in one spot, bitter frost everywhere else. Nobles burned through forests just to keep these fires alive. Records suggest some castles consumed over 100 logs in a single week. That's enough wood to build a cabin gone in 7 days. Servants hauled it non-stop, feeding the flames like sacrifices to a hungry god. And yet, the fire alone wasn't enough. The real genius of the Great Hall was people. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, gathered together under one roof. Each person radiated warmth like a small lamp. Scientists today tell us one body equals the heat of a 100-watt bulb. Now, Multiply that by a hall filled with feasting, singing, and dancing, and you have a human-powered furnace. That's why winter was feast season. Banquets weren't just celebrations, they were heating systems. The clatter of plates, the steam of hot stew, the stomp of dancers, the buzz of gossip, all of it kept the hall alive with energy. A medieval party was survival wrapped in celebration. Even architecture joined in. High windows let smoke escape but trapped much of the heat below. Tapestries lined the walls, softening echoes and sealing warmth inside. Carpets spread across the floors, shielding feet from icy stone. Every detail served the same purpose. Keep the heat where the people were. Now imagine yourself there. Would you rather spend the night huddled in your private chamber, cold but quiet, or press shoulder to shoulder in the great hall, warmed by fire and company? Comment chamber or hall because each had its cost. Privacy meant cold, warmth meant community. But even the great hall had its limits. When the fire burned low, when the guests drifted away, when the logs dwindled, the cold returned. It seeped in from below, crawling up through the very stones. And that brings us to one of the most astonishing secrets of medieval engineering, an idea borrowed from ancient Rome itself. Some castles found a way to heat their floors from beneath. Imagine walking barefoot across stone in winter and feeling heat rising under your feet. Because in the next chapter, we uncover the medieval hypocaust, the underfloor heating system that made castles feel centuries ahead of their time. The stones under your feet feel solid, lifeless, and cold. But in certain castles and monasteries, those same stones once pulsed with hidden heat. Beneath them, fire moved in secret tunnels, warming rooms from below. This was the medieval hypocaust, an invention that feels almost futuristic even today. Picture it. A furnace burned in a chamber at the edge of the building. The hot air didn't just vanish up a chimney. Instead, it was channeled under raised floors, slipping through brick pillars and hollow cavities. The stone tiles above soaked up that heat, then released it slowly into the room. Step inside, and the floor itself glowed with warmth. The idea wasn't entirely medieval, it came from the Romans. But in an age where most homes battled constant drafts, reviving this system was nothing short of extraordinary. Monasteries used it to keep monks comfortable during long winter prayers. Wealthy nobles installed it in bathhouses, creating what must have felt like a miracle. Warm water, steam, and floors that never froze. Think about how rare this was. For most peasants, warmth meant a smoky hearth and shared blankets. For the elite, underfloor heating meant walking barefoot across stone in January without a shiver. Doesn't that sound more like modern luxury than medieval survival? But the hypocaust wasn't just comfort, it was a statement. Imagine a visiting lord stepping into your hall, the floor radiating heat beneath his boots. It said power, wealth, and engineering genius. Few castles had it, but those that did stood apart as marvels of their age. Of course, it came at a price. Furnaces had to be fed constantly with wood or charcoal. Servants worked night and day to keep the fires alive, scraping soot and hauling fuel. And if the system wasn't managed carefully, smoke could back up, choking the rooms it was meant to heat. Luxury, yes, but also labor. Now let me ask, if you lived back then, would you choose the reliability of a roaring fireplace or gamble on the high-maintenance magic of heated floors? Drop your answer below because each choice reveals the kind of life you'd have led. And here's a fun challenge. Think about your own home today. Central heating, space heaters, maybe even heated bathroom tiles. Would you be shocked to know that medieval builders were already experimenting with those ideas hundreds of years ago? The hypocaust proves something important. Medieval people weren't just surviving, they were innovating. They looked at cold stone castles and asked, "How do we make this livable?" And sometimes their answers still echo in the houses we live in now. But if heating the floor sounds advanced, wait until you discover what they did with food, kitchens, and fire. Because the warmest room in any castle wasn't the Lord's chamber or the chapel, it was the kitchen. And there, survival met invention in ways that shaped everyday life. Follow the smoke, and it will always lead you to the kitchen, the beating, burning core of any castle. Forget the Lord's chamber or the Great Hall. If you wanted guaranteed warmth, you went where the pots boiled and the bread baked. Imagine stepping into that space. The air is thick with steam, spices, and the hiss of dripping fat over open flames. Fires blaze under cauldrons the size of barrels. Bread ovens glow with heat, their stones radiating warmth long after the flames die. For servants and cooks, it wasn't just a workplace, it was survival. The kitchen fire never truly went out. Food demanded constant preparation: soups, stews, roasts, and bread to feed hundreds. That meant the hearths were always alive, pumping heat into the room. Servants often lingered there not only to work, but to thaw their fingers, warm their bones, and survive the chill of the castle beyond. Even the food itself became part of the heating system. Stews simmered for hours, sending steam into the air and warming everyone nearby. Heated stones pulled from the fire weren't wasted. They were dropped into mugs of ale to warm drinks, or wrapped in cloth and carried away as portable heaters. It was the medieval version of a thermos, born in the firelight. And think about this. Kitchens often doubled as sleeping quarters for servants in winter. Why trek back to a freezing dormitory when the warmest place in the castle was right here? Sleeping beside the hearth meant you woke to both warmth and breakfast. Practical, efficient, and life-saving. But the kitchen wasn't just fire, it was design. Chimneys, when they existed, weren't only about removing smoke. They captured rising heat and funneled it into nearby walls where stones held the warmth. Sometimes, upper rooms directly above the kitchen enjoyed the benefits, warmed from below by nothing more than dinner being cooked downstairs. So here's a question. If you had to choose one medieval heating trick for your own home, would you take the underfloor hypocaust? Or a kitchen that doubled as a 24/7 heater? Comment floors or kitchen because each reveals a very different kind of castle life. Now imagine the kitchen at night. The fires dim, the cooks retreat, but embers still glow. The smell of bread lingers, smoke drifts lazily upward, and the warmth clings stubbornly to the stones. For those lucky enough to stay inside, it was as close as medieval life came to central heating. But the kitchen had its limits. Fires here were functional, not decorative, and warmth spread unevenly. To truly make a home or hall bearable, people needed more than just fire. They needed textiles, layers, and a softer defense against the cold stone world around them. And that's where wool, furs, and fabrics enter the story. Because in the next chapter, warmth didn't come from fire at all. It came from what you wore, what you slept in, and what you draped over the walls themselves. The fire fades, the embers dim, and the stone walls still breathe cold. But survival didn't always depend on flames. Sometimes, warmth was woven. Clothing in the Middle Ages wasn't just fashion, it was armor against winter. Start with the basics: linen undergarments. Light, breathable, and able to trap a thin layer of air close to the skin. That trapped air was the first line of insulation, invisible but effective. Over that came wool, thick tunics, gowns, and cloaks spun from sheep's fleece. Wool was magic to medieval people. It could be wet and still insulate, heavy yet flexible, scratchy but life-saving. Wealthy nobles draped themselves in velvet lined with fur, a portable fortress of warmth. A single fur-lined cloak might contain pelts from dozens of foxes or martens, creating what we would now call a wearable furnace. Night didn't end the layering game. People slept in long woolen gowns and stockings, with caps pulled over their heads. Why caps? Because most body heat escapes through the scalp. A simple wool cap could mean the difference between shivering and sleeping. Imagine a bedroom full of people in long shirts and floppy hats. It sounds almost comical, yet it was utterly practical. Beds themselves became textile machines. Mattresses stuffed with straw or feathers, stacked with layers of heavy wool blankets. The richest households owned feather beds so thick and soft they swallowed you whole. A single bed might require feathers from 100 geese, a luxury so extravagant it was both warmth and status symbol. Even the walls and floors wore clothes. Tapestries, heavy and embroidered, hung from stone walls to block drafts. They weren't just decoration, they were insulation. Thick rugs and rush mats softened floors, sealing in what little heat the stones released. Entering a room draped in rich fabrics wasn't just beautiful, it was warmer by several degrees. Here's something to think about. Today, we rely on central heating, but imagine trying to survive a blackout in winter. Would you know how to layer clothes, stack blankets, or insulate walls the way medieval people did? Drop your answer in the comments because many of their tricks still work better than you'd expect. And let's not forget the social side of textiles. Embroidered blankets, patterned quilts, family tapestries, these weren't just functional. They carried memory, heritage, and pride. A quilt could warm your body and remind you of your ancestors in the same breath. So when we imagine castles as cold and lifeless, we miss the truth. Every layer of wool, every draped tapestry, every feather bed was part of a defense system. A defense not against enemies at the gate, but against the relentless bite of winter. But even with fire, stone, and fabric, there was still one last frontier of warmth. A place not built of wood or wool, but of routine and rhythm. Because in the final chapter, we'll see how medieval daily life itself, the way people worked, gathered, and moved, kept the cold at bay. The truth is, warmth in the Middle Ages wasn't only about fire, stone, or fabric. It was about rhythm, the way people lived, worked, and rested. Daily life itself became the final defense against the cold. Picture a winter morning in a castle or cottage. People rose with the sun, not because of laziness, but because daylight was survival. Fires were lit early, tasks began immediately. Work itself, chopping wood, tending animals, hauling water kept blood moving and bodies warm. Cold wasn't something to avoid, it was something you outran through constant motion. Meals were built for warmth, too. Thick pottages, stews, and hot bread didn't just fill bellies, they kept people heated from the inside out. Ale and mulled wine warmed both body and spirit. Even something as simple as holding a clay mug of hot broth became a tiny personal heater on freezing days. And when work ended, life contracted into the warmest spaces. Families gathered around the hearth, children played near the firelight, stories and songs filled the night. Great halls glowed with laughter, while cottages buzzed with quiet chores, spinning wool, mending clothes, telling tales. Togetherness itself became a kind of insulation. But life wasn't just routine, it was adaptation. Bedrooms were smaller than halls, ceilings lower, windows narrower. Beds were shared, doors were curtained, animals were brought inside. People didn't fight the cold. With technology, they shaped their days and nights around it. Now, here's a question for you. Do you think modern people could survive a single medieval winter without electricity or central heating? Imagine 3 months of frost with only wool, wood, and each other. Comment yes or no because your answer says a lot about how far we've drifted from nature's rhythms. One more thing. Medieval people didn't see this way of life as hardship. It was simply normal. Cold nights, early mornings, thick clothes, crowded halls. It was the background of existence. And within it, there was warmth not just of body, but of community. They found comfort in simplicity, meaning in routine, and survival in unity. So when you picture a castle stone towers rising into a snowy sky, don't imagine only the frost. Imagine the hidden firelight, the layered wool, the crowded beds, the kitchen smoke, the whispered stories in the dark. A castle wasn't just a fortress of stone. It was a fortress of warmth, built from invention, tradition, and togetherness. And here's the takeaway. Even without chimneys, radiators, or central heating, medieval people stayed alive and often surprisingly comfortable. Their methods may look primitive to us, but many are still relevant today. So the next time you pull a blanket tight, sip something hot, or gather with family around a warm room, remember, you're practicing a survival strategy hundreds of years old. So, the next time you picture a freezing stone castle, remember it wasn't just walls and fire, it was people, inventions, and daily rituals keeping the cold at bay. If this journey into medieval life surprised you, you'll love what's coming next. Because castles didn't just fight winter, they also had shocking ways of dealing with plumbing, waste, and water. Subscribe now so you don't miss that story. And tell me in the comments, which trick would you try first if you were trapped in a medieval winter?